Chapter 29 of The Seventh Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Robert Kuiper. The Seventh Man by Max Brand. Chapter 29. Billy the Clerk. If Sheriff Pete Glass had been the typical hard-riding, sure-shooting officer of the law, as it is seen in the mountain desert, his work would have died with his death. But Glass had a mind as active as his hands, and therefore, for at least a little while, his work went on after him. He had gathered 15 practiced fighters, who represented, it might be said, the brute body of the law, and when they, with most of Rickard at their heels, burst down the door of the sheriff's office and found his body, they had only one thought, which was to swing into the saddle and ride on the trail of the killer, who was even now a diminishing cloud of dust down the street. He was riding almost due east, and the cry went up, "He's streaking it for the Morgan Hills! Get after him, boys!" So into the saddle they went with a rush, 15 tried men on 15 chosen horses, and went down the street with a roar of hoofbeats. That was the body and muscle of the sheriff's work, going out to avenge him, but the mind of the law remained behind. It was old Billy the Clerk. No one paid particular attention to Billy, and they never had. He was useless on a horse and ridiculous with a gun, and the only place where he seemed formidable was behind a typewriter. Now he sat looking down into the dead face of Pete Glass, trying to grasp the meaning of it all. From the first he had been with Pete. From the first the invincibility of the dusty little man had been the chief article of Billy's creed, and now his dull eyes, bleared with the 30 years of clerical labor, wandered around on the galaxy of dead men who looked down at him from the wall. He leaned over and took the hand of the sheriff as one would lean to help a fallen man, but the fingers were already growing cold. And then Billy realized for the first time that this was death. Pete Glass had been. Pete Glass was not. Next he knew that something had to be done. But what it was he could not tell, for he sat in the sheriff's office, and in that room he was accustomed to stop thinking and receive orders. He went back to his own little cubbyhole and sat down behind the typewriter. At once his mind cleared, thoughts came and linked themselves into ideas, pictures, plans. The murderer must be taken dead or alive, and those 15 men had ridden out to do the necessary thing. They had seemed irresistible as they departed. Indeed, no living thing they met could withstand them, human or otherwise, as Billy very well knew. Yet he recalled a saying of the sheriff, a thing he had insisted upon: "No man on no hoss will ever ride down Whistlin' Dan Barry. It's been tried before and it's never worked. I've looked up his history and it can't be done. If he's going to be ran down, it's got to be done with relays, like you was running down a wild hoss." Billy rubbed his bald head and thought and thought. With that orderliness which had become his habit of mind, from work with reports and papers, sorting and filing away, Billy went back to the beginning. Dan Barry was fleeing. He started from Rickard, and 9 chances out of 10 he was heading, eventually, toward those particularly impenetrable mountain ranges where the sheriff before had lost the trail after the escape from the cabin and the killing of Mat Henshaw. Towards this same region again he had retreated after the notorious killing at Alder. There was no doubt then, humanly speaking, that he would make for the same safe refuge. At first glance this seemed quite improbable, to be sure, for the Morgan Hills lay due east, or very nearly east, while the place from which Barry must have sallied forth and to which he would return was somewhere well north of west, and a good 40 miles away. It seemed strange that he would strike off in the opposite direction, so Billy closed his eyes, leaned back in his chair, and summoned up a picture of the country. 5 miles to the east the Morgan Hills rolled, sharply broken ups and downs of country. Badlands rather than real hills, and a difficult region to keep game in view. That very idea gave Billy his clue. Barry knew that he would be followed hard and fast, and he headed straight for the Morgans to throw the posse off the final direction he intended to take in his flight. In spite of the matchless speed of that black stallion of which the sheriff had learned so much, he would probably let the posse keep within easy view of him until he was deep within the Badlands. Then he would double sharply around and strike out in the true direction of his flight. Having reached this point in his deductions, Billy smote his hands together. He was trembling with excitement so that he filled his pipe with difficulty. By the time it was drawing well, he was back examining his mental picture of the country. West of Rickett, about the same distance as Morgan Hills, ran the Wago Mountains, low, rolling ranges which would hardly form an impediment for a horseman. Across these Barry might cut at a good speed on his western course. But some 15 or 20 miles from Rickett he was bound to reach a most difficult barrier. It was the Asper River, at this season of the year swollen high and swift with snow water. A rare feat indeed if a man could swim his horse across such a stream. There were only two places in which it could be forded. About 50 miles north and a little east of the line from Rickett, the Asper spread out into a broad, shallow bed. Its streams dispersed for several miles into a number of channels, which united again further down the course, and made the same strong river. Towards this ford, therefore, it was possible that Dan Barry would head, in the region of Caswell City. There was, however, another way of crossing the stream. Almost due west of Rickett, a distance of 15 miles, Tucker Creek joined the Asper. Above the point of junction, both the creek and the river were readily fordable, and Barry could cross them and head straight for his goal. It was true that to make Tucker Creek he would have to double out of the Morgan Hills and brush back perilously close to Rickett, but Billy was convinced that this was the outlaw's plan. For though the Caswell City fords would be his safest route, it would take him a day's ride on an ordinary horse out of his way. Besides, the sheriff had always said, "Barry will play the chance." Billy would have ventured his life that the fugitive would strike straight for the creek as soon as he doubled out of the Morgan Hills. Doors began to bang. 100 pairs of boots thudded and jingled towards Billy. The noise of voices rolled through the outer hall, poured through the door, burst upon his ears. He looked up in mild surprise. The first wave of Rickett's men had swept out of the courthouse to take the trail of the fugitive or to watch the pursuit. In this second wave came the remnants, the old men, the women, great-eyed children. In spite of their noise of foot and voice, they appeared to be trying to walk stealthily, talk so softly. They leaned upon his desk and questioned him with gesticulations, but he only stared. They were all dim as dream people to Billy the clerk, whose mind was far away, struggling with his problem. "Poor old Billy is kind of dazed," suggested a woman. "Don't bother him, Bud. Look here." The tide of noise and faces broke on either side of the desk and swayed off towards the inner office, and vaguely Billy felt that they should not be there. The sheriff's privacy, the thought almost drew him back to complete consciousness, but he was borne off from them again on a wave of study, pictures. Off there to the east went the 15 best men of the mountain desert, on the trail of the slender fellow with the black hair and the soft brown eyes. How he had seemed to shrink with aloofness, timidity, when he stood there at the door, giving his name. It was not modesty. Billy knew now. It was something akin to the beasts of prey who shrink from the eyes of men until they are mad with hunger, and in the slender man Billy remembered the same shrinking, the same hunger. When he struck, no wonder that even the sheriff went down. No wonder if even the 15 men were baffled on that trail. And therefore it was sufficiently insane for him, Billy the clerk, to sit in his office and dream with his ineffectual hands of stopping that resistless flight. Yet he pulled himself back to his problem. Considering his problem in general, the thing was perfectly simple. Barry was sure to head west, and to the west there were only two gates, fording the creek and the river above the junction in the first place, or, in the second place, cutting across the Asper far north at Caswell City. If he could be turned from the direction of Tucker Creek, he would head for the second possible crossing, and when he drew near Caswell City, if he were turned by force of numbers again, he would unquestionably skirt the Asper, hoping against hope that he might find a fordable place as he galloped south. But going south, he might be fenced again from Tucker Creek.